Shabbat Shalom. And currently, right now, I am in the Sea of Galilee. And I would like to share to you about the things that the Lord has impressed upon me in this place, in this holy place. Now, the Sea of Galilee, you can find verses in the Bible in both the Older and Newer Covenant, 6 of which can be found in the Older Covenant, and 65 verses can be found in the Brit Kadashah, in the 4 Gospels, and the Book of Acts. Now, the first 2 verses pertains to Joshua mentioning Galilee pertaining to the city of refuge. Now, the city of refuge is allocated for the accidental death or accidental killing of people, and to prevent the shedding of blood of the perpetrator. They will have to stay in the city of refuge until they are presented to the proper authorities to see to it and make sure that there is no malice or foul play with regards to the killing. Now, in the city of refuge, the person who will flee from the possible retribution from the relatives of the victim will have to stay in the city of refuge for until the death of the high priest that time. And while he is there, he is protected. Now, there are other city of refuge all over Israel, and those that are in there are protected by the Torah. Now, the third passage that was referred to is in 1 Kings 9:11, referring to King Solomon giving King Hiram of Tyre in exchange for the excessive golds that he gave to Solomon to build the temple. But Hiram was not happy about the exchange and called called the cities as Kabul, which means sterile. Now, he doesn't like Galilee. For him, it is useless. It is sterile. There is no growth in this city, which is technically in contrast with what the Lord Yeshua himself did. For out of this city, out of the Sea of Galilee, came the apostles, at least the 4 primary apostles, which is Peter and Andrew and James and John, the sons of the Zebedees, who are fishermen. And this is where he called them for the ministry. And these 4 disciples produced a lot of spiritual converts. So making which is basically in contrast with what the King Hiram of Tyre look at the cities. So he's looking at it in a physical perspective, but from the Lord's perspective, the Sea of Galilee is a much more important than what people can think. Now, the next passage that was referred to, that is referring to Galilee, is in Isaiah 9:1. It says that, "Nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in her vexation, when at first the lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, in Galilee, and of the nations." And in verse 2, Isaiah 9:2, "The people that walk in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined." And we know that that light is Yeshua. Now, only 6 verses or passages refers to the Sea of Galilee, so it looks like it's not a very important place during the time, except for the things that I already mentioned. And we have to remember the city of refuge being part of in the Galilee, and it was mentioned twice in the book of Joshua. Will also the preaching about the proper judgment of people, or how to deal with people, which is in Matthew 18, will be presented. So, and there is also a contrast with the um, the King Hiram, taking note of this Galilee as useless or sterile. And in Isaiah, of course, it has been prophesied that something really good will come out of this. Now, jumping into the Brit Kadashah, the very first mention of this passage, I mean of the city of the Sea of Galilee, is in Matthew chapter 2, verse 22, when Joseph was told to come back from Egypt with their child. And then the next mention was Yeshua's baptism when he left Galilee to Jordan for mikveh. So these two consecutive passages would be um, really important, because from the time that Joseph escaped to Egypt, because Herod tried to kill the child, the baby Yeshua, and from then his son is being called out of Egypt, going to Galilee. And it is very interesting. And from there, um, he left Galilee to Jordan for mikveh when he was already an adult, and which means that he will be starting his ministry upon leaving Galilee. And in Matthew chapter 4, verse 12, he came back to Galilee after John's imprisonment. So Galilee becomes an important part of in Yeshua's ministry, and in a sense, Yeshua tried to escape the persecution of the prophets, because John the Baptist, we have to remember that Yeshua tried to take over the place of John the Baptist when he was in prison, but to not to provoke the authorities at the time, he left for Galilee. And now the next mention was Matthew 4:15, referring a prophecy referred for by Isaiah in Isaiah 9:2, referring to the darkness having seen the great light. And in Matthew 4:19, what is very interesting is the most famous verse, and the first call for to follow him is when he said to Peter and Andrew, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." And I believe he also called James and John from this place, as I mentioned earlier already, and he may have spoken about this, which is another important passage that we'll refer to in a bit later, which I will explain shortly. Now, in this sterile land came huge converts, and people heard the message. For in this place also happened the first mass evangelism in Matthew 4:25, and also the feeding of the 4,000, and I believe also the feeding of the 5,000. And in Matthew 17:22, this is also the first mention of his death and resurrection. So there is so much going on in this piece of land, which is not really in many people, they don't really see this as something that is amazing, because people are focusing that Yeshua is just always in Jerusalem or wherever, but sometimes we miss that most of his ministerial activities and many things that has been recorded in the Bible with regards to his ministry happened in the area of the Sea of Galilee, and also of his death and resurrection, and even later on of the future events. Another significant passage here is in Matthew 17:24 to 27, referring to the temple tax. When Peter was approached by some guy and said, "Does your master pay the temple tax?" And Peter said, "Of course he does." Probably Peter is referring to the past events that the Lord has been paying, or we don't know whether he just assumed it because he knows that his master would not violate any law. But before, as we know around the story, that before even Peter opened his mouth with regards to what happened, the Lord asked him, "To whom does the king get the taxes? Is it from the subjects or from the people or from the children, from his sons?" And of course, Peter said, of course, from the subjects, from the people. And then he said, "So the sons are exempted. And so that we will not offend them, this is what you can do. You go throw a line into the sea, which is the Sea of Galilee, and you will catch a fish. And then grab that fish and open its mouth, and you will get a coin, and you pay the temple tax for both me and you." So here's the thing now. I was told today that that fish is also known as St. Peter's fish. And I was surprised because the St. Peter's fish is a tilapia. It is a tilapia that is actually my favorite as well, and for most people too. Now, the thing about this though is there are six kinds of tilapia in the Sea of Galilee, and they are not the same. The St. Peter's fish, which is a different kind of tilapia, is very unique because it is the only kind of species that would protect its young in a different manner. It if it would sense any kind of danger, he would actually suck all the little fish, his not siblings, but seedlings, or the little fish. When the mom or the dad fish, St. Peter's fish, would detect the danger, they would suck in their children in their mouth. So there are many times that this St. Peter's fish are caught with their kids in their mouth. But it's not only the kids that are being swallowed. Apparently, this St. Peter's fish is also a bottom feeder, and it is fond of and attracted of eating or swallowing any kind of shiny things, and that includes the coins. So there are many times that fishermen can catch some kind of shiny thing in their mouth, whether it is a shiny stone or a gold or silver or even a coin. Thus, this is not what the Lord asked Peter to do. Is not a one-time event. It is happening. But what is interesting about this is that the Saint Peter's fish, which is a tilapia, this is the only kind of tilapia that do this. Now, another thing that was mentioned about here is the Matthew 18 sermon, which refers to the justice system, or how we deal with people. And it was done also in the Sea of Galilee. Remember, the first two verses mentioning Galilee is about the city of refuge. It talks about a justice system, because you cannot just kill a person who killed your relative accidentally. So, but of course, it has to be investigated. And if we look at Matthew 18 in the Bible, and I would like to read a few passages in this passage, um, and we will deal with the passages about this justice system. I would the very first chapter talks about who is the greatest in the kingdom. And the Lord said in verse 3, "Verily I say unto you, except ye be converted and become as little children, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven." So it's not about who's the highest or the lowest. It doesn't matter. Remember, the Sea of Galilee, or the Galilean area, is not a very popular area. It's even called a Kabul. It's sterile. It's useless. Um, Now, what is interesting is they're talking about who's the greatest in a city that is the lowest of all. But he said, if you become little children, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven, referring to the highest place where a person can go, which is the kingdom of heaven. And then he said, whoever therefore humble himself as this little child, the same is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So he talks about the right things, about being humble. And whosoever shall receive one such little child in my name receives me. So it's about doing good works. Doing good works. Now, he also said in verse 6 that whoever shall offend one of this, remember this is a justice system. These little ones which believes in me, it's better for him that a millstone were hung about his neck and that were drowned in the depths of the sea. And in the past we discussed about this, that this actually alludes to what was done to Azazel, as referred to an extra biblical writing about the book of Enoch, which is entirely different topic but is related as well. Now, in verse 7, Matthew 18:7, it talks about woe unto the world because of offenses. It talks about the justice system. So, but for it must need that offenses come, but woe to that man by whom the offense cometh. So, again, this alludes to Azazel, because he is the man of sin. He is the one who caused everybody to sin, according to the book of Enoch. Again, I'm not saying that the book of Enoch is a Bible, but it is being alluded to. Otherwise, there is no other biblical passage that would be referring to. Anyway, going forward, it talks about a hand and a foot being offended. You can cut them off, and it's better for you to enter life than to without a foot or a hand, rather than having complete body, and you're gonna go to the everlasting fire. So it talks about the discipline of oneself, and it talks about the lost sheep, referring to if you have one little sheep that was lost, and it has to be found, and the Heavenly Father and the angels in heaven celebrates with this. So it also refers to the Son of Man, which is him, has come to save that what was lost. Remember, Galilee is not a very important city, and it's almost like saying that this city is lost. Now, another thing here, we're gonna go forward in Matthew 18:15. It talks about the brother who shall trespass against thee, and go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. If he shall hear thee, thou shalt gain the brother. So if your brother offends you, he can go to you, or you can go to him and tell him that you're offended. But if he doesn't listen, you go to two more witnesses, which refers to the elders of the congregation, and unless there is a physical witness to what is going on, and if of course they won't hear, then we bring it to the ecclesia, and if being rejected, if that person still won't listen, then you treat him like a heathen or a publican or a Gentile. But how do we treat the heathen and the publican? We still have to love them. Anyway, going forward, in Matthew 18:18, it shows that whatever you shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whosoever shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And again, I say unto you that if the two of you shall agree on earth as touching on anything that they ask, it shall be done to them. Of my Father which is in heaven, where two or three witnesses are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst of them. But this refers to the leadership. But the whole point in Matthew 18, a very important one there, is about justice system. Now in Matthew 18:21, going forward, it talks about the unforgiving servant. So again, the Lord wants justice, but at the same time mercy. That's why he said that I desire compassion rather than sacrifice. So he wants justice, but if justice cannot be served for one reason or another, and yet the person who offends is really um, repentant, so therefore the biblical restitution cannot be implemented, then we come with a forgiving attitude as declared here. So anyways, it's a passing through of that Matthew 18, and this was done in the Sea of Galilee. Now, going back to our main topic, we can see here also that in the prophecy of resurrection was made in the Sea of Galilee, or he said that we have to go. He will go to the Sea of Galilee when he rise up from the dead in Matthew 26:32, and also the giving of the Great Commission was done in in this area in the Sea of Galilee. The ascension message, which is in also mentioned in Matthew 28:18-20, and he said, "All authorities in heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, go ye into all the nations and make disciples of all nations, and baptize them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Ruach HaKodesh, and teach them to obey everything that I commanded you," meaning all his commandments, "and I will be with you till the end of the age." Now, in Acts 1:7, he also said about the future. This is now the setting in the Sea of Galilee. But before that, actually, I want to point out something here, that in John, in the last part of John, when he recorded the passage, is that after Yeshua's resurrection, the death and resurrection, the apostles, Peter and James and John, went back for fishing, because that's what they know best. And so when they were fishing, they went overnight and they did not catch anything. And while they were approaching the shore, they saw a man who shouted, "How's the fishing?" They said they did not catch anything all night. And he said, "Try to throw your net on the right side." But there is also an interpretation that it should have been said, "Throw it the right way." Either way, that's what they did. They threw it on the right side and they caught the fish. And when Yohanan, one of the apostles, John the beloved, realized that it was the Lord, he exclaimed, "It's the Lord." And when Peter heard that, he removed his outer garment and then tied it himself and jumped to the sea and went ahead with just to meet the Lord. And John and James followed through with lots of fish. And when Peter reached the shore, he saw Yeshua there. They're not, talking much, but he was cooking food for them, and he gave thanks. They waited for John and James, and they talked a little bit, and then Peter was asked by the Lord 3 times, "Peter, do you love me?" And Peter said, "Of course, Lord, I love you." And he said, "If you love me, feed my sheep." And it was done 3 times. Now, I want people to understand that it was done 3 times because 3 times Peter denied the Lord. That's one interpretation of it. And there is a second interpretation by someone on the tour. Actually, it was said by the tour guide that it also refers to the Lord is making sure that Peter has this ability or has this passion to really feed the sheep. He's making sure of it. The Lord is also testing Peter in a way of annoying him, whether he's really going to do it. That's what the impression of some people. Now, the third interpretation is that there is a practice in a rabbinic practice that would tell the people, when somebody wants to convert, they would be denied 3 times to make sure that they really, really want it. So it talks about the motivation to come in. So having to say 3 times is to make sure that Peter is motivated to really feed the sheep. Now, after that, another instance is in Acts 1:7, which is about the ascension when 500 people were there. And he said to them, "It is not for you to know the times or the seasons from which the Father has put in his own power, but you shall receive power after the Ruach HaKodesh has come upon you, and you shall be witnesses unto me both in Jerusalem, in all Judea, and in Samaria, and unto the uttermost part of the earth." And this was done in the Sea of Galilee. Now, and also the prophecy of the return, which was done of the return of Yeshua, which was done by the angels, when he was taken up into heaven. They were looking at it, looking at the sky, and there were two men in white standing, which is apparently angels, and they said, "Yeah, men of Galilee, why stand up gazing into heaven? This same Yeshua, which is taken up from you into heaven, shall so come in the manner as you have seen him go into heaven." So all of this happened in the Sea of Galilee. So I hope and pray that this little parsha and sharing that I personally encountered will bring encouragement and joy with regards to serving the Lord. Shabbat Shalom.